There were a number of early breechloaders developed in Great Britain, one of which was the Calisher Terry, which was also used during the American Civil War. How do we know that? Well, Jeb Stuart had one.
You know, a lot of people think that a bolt-action rifle is kind of a modern contrivance, but it's not. It goes back to the mid-19th century. There were a number of different companies that made bolt actions. There was, Palmer, there was Greene, and to my mind, the most interesting, the Calisher Terry, or also known as just the plain Terry carbine. The Terry carbine was kind of the brainchild of William Terry, who was an Englishman. He invented the rifle in 1855, and the way it worked was the bolt consisted of a side-swinging bolt, quote, handle that was hinged, and also it helped block the loading gate, so when the gun was fired, it helped obturation a little bit. What you do is you swing this out, you rotated it, you pulled the bolt back, and it just had very simple locking lugs on it, nothing exotic, and you had a very interesting cartridge.
What they come up with is this cartridge carbine combination that uses a greased felt wad at the base of the cartridge. And it actually works really smoothly and a little ingeniously, because what happens is when you open this folding lever and you unlock the bolt, it shows this little port on the right side of the gun, and you just stick your paper cartridge in there with that greased wad at the rear. And then that greased wad, if it has enough grease in it, is gonna seal the breech pretty well. And then when you fire the gun, that wad is still in there against the breech. And when you open the bolt and then put your next round in, you're pushing that greased wad up to the front. And then when you fire your second round, that wad is going to clear out some of the fouling and lubricate the bore. And so it actually keeps the gun in operation, which is something that's a critical concern in the black powder era, is making sure that you have some way to clear the fouling out of the gun so that you don't get the bore too loaded up that it prevents the gun from being able to be loaded and fired.
The firm of Calisher Terry in Great Britain in the 1850s designed and manufactured what I consider to be one of the first fairly functional, fairly successful and practical breech-loading bolt-action rifles of their time. Now, we often associate the first bolt action with the Mausers and Samuel Norris in 1867. But here we're talking about 12 or 13 years earlier with something that looks remarkably like an actual bolt action with locking lugs on it that is in the form of the Calisher Terry carbine. And this is a British manufacturer made in Birmingham, England. And originally for the 18th Hussars, they were privately purchasing their arms. It saw a great deal of acceptance in colonial armories such as New Zealand and Australia. Especially in New Zealand, you find a lot of these.
By all accounts, the Terry worked as designed. The problem with the Terry is because of this weird two-lug locking breech at the rear and this tiny little loading port, you're not loading straight from the back of the gun like you are with other breech loading designs of the era, like the Sharps rifle. And so when metallic cartridges do come to the fore, the Terry carbine isn't suited to load a self-contained metallic cartridge because it has no direct access to the breech, and there's no easy way to get that spent case out because it's essentially using caseless ammunition. It's a weird way to think about it, but that's what it is at the time. There's nothing left after you're firing except the greased wad.
Probably of most concern to Americans are a number of Terrys made it over during the American Civil War. Jeb Stuart, along with his LeMat revolver, carried a Terry carbine, and he had it with him when he was killed at Yellow Tavern. President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, had a Terry carbine, and that was captured in his baggage when he was captured. And as well, there were a number of these guns that found their way via the blockade to mounted troops. They were well enough known in Confederate ranks to have a nickname called the doorbolt gun. There's really no way to tell if a Terry is a Confederate gun. One thing you can tell that if it's not a Confederate gun is if it has British markings on it, because those guns were issued to the British Army the same time that the American Civil War was going. All of the Confederate Terrys that you find will have been civilian-made guns, and they will have different makers' names on them. And somehow they would find themselves with a lot of firearms that made it through the blockade and ended up being distributed. There's no real records to determine whether there was any kind of concerted effort to buy Terrys. I think they just kind of ended up with a batch of other stuff, and over they went, and they ended up with who they ended up with.